Welcome. You're tuned to KSQD Santa Cruz, and we're broadcasting on 90.7 FM or live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. This is State of Mind, being human and living well, and I'm your host, Deborah Sloss. Here in the U.S., the number of Americans 65 and older is projected to more than double by the year 2060. Today we're going to be discussing social isolation and loneliness in these older adults, an issue that affects more than half of all seniors here in our county and many more across the country. Currently, there's an exhibit at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History called We're Still Here that explores this concern and features the voices, images, and artwork of our local seniors who have had the experiences of isolation and loneliness. We are so fortunate today to be joined by guest Tim Znamierowski, who's going to share with us about his experience as an older adult of becoming isolated and depressed, and how he has since found his way to community, connection, and greater physical and mental health. Also with me are two more guests, both with expertise in working with our local seniors. Elizabeth Hutton is a social worker at Senior Network Services. Elizabeth meets with individuals and family members to determine physical, mental, and emotional needs, and then links them to resources that are available either through Senior Network Services or through referrals to other agencies in the county. Liz was also one of the many committee members that worked on the Seniors in Isolation exhibit at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. Also with me is Mike McConnell, who has over 21 years of experience in county social services. He works in a variety of settings, helping to shape policy affecting seniors. Mike was a leading participant on the C3, Creative Community Committee planning group for the We're Still Here Seniors and Social Isolation exhibit, now up at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
glad you're here with me today. So just to get started, Mike, could you tell us about who and why, people came together to shine a light on this particular concern about seniors' isolation and loneliness?
Yes, so the executive director of the MAW, Nina Simon, and Ellen Timberlake, who's the director of social services in the county, were talking about social issues and wanting to see how they could work together to make an impact in the community. And it just became apparent that art could be a really powerful medium for allowing people to be empathetic to the needs of those that are struggling in their community. So they did a project last year focusing on foster youth called the Lost Childhoods exhibit, and it was very successful. And this year they talked about, what are some of the major issues in our community, and senior isolation and loneliness certainly rose to the top.
Can you say why that did?
Well, there was a study that came out showing that isolation and loneliness is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It has a higher mortality rate than obesity because of the health risk. It causes inflammation. It affects your autoimmune system. Can lead to dementia. In Great Britain, they declared, or they appointed a minister of loneliness to look at the issue there because they consider it a public health issue. So, when that came to our attention, we started talking to some of our staff and other partners that work with older adults. And some of our social workers go out once a year to see our clients for one of our programs, and they would often report that that person would say that was the only contact they've had in either several months or the entire year. So we knew locally that those issues were prominent.
Right.
And then there was a senior study done, or a survey done by Seniors Council, that found that over half of our seniors in our county were actually experiencing loneliness.
So that was why you chose that as the topic this
Yes.
year. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, just to be clear, we're talking about isolation. What do we actually mean when we say that? Like, can you describe what that means for people when they report that they're lonely or isolated?
Sure, and The definitions vary, and I think even Tim and Liz can agree. When we were doing the planning, we kind of talked about what does loneliness and isolation really mean. And I think what it really means is people that have a lack of meaningful relationships or social connections. Isolation itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but when it's combined with loneliness, it becomes a real issue.
So that's when you really know that it's becoming problematic, and that's when it leads to those other health concerns that you spoke about?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And if you ask people if they're lonely, it's kind of your own interpretation because it's an emotional response or an emotional feeling of loneliness. Isolation can be a different thing. It turns out for seniors, those that are most vulnerable are, feeling loneliness, but are also more physically isolated. Usually because of conditions that are out of their own control.
Yeah. Well, that's I wanted to turn to Liz about that very thing and ask her, as an experienced social worker, can you elaborate on, the kind of, what do you see? Who are the people who tend to find themselves feeling isolated or lonely?
I can talk about that, but I'd like to first, as Mike had pointed out, there's a differentiation between isolation and loneliness.
Yeah.
And all the literature, when you read it, the isolation is really quantifiable. It's objective. It is the physical separation. So how often are you connected with people, family members, or in the community? And then subjective. The loneliness is subjective, as Mike had said. That's the feeling. That's the depressed feeling that comes along with the isolation. And people. Again, Mike touched on this, physical abilities. Once older adults start physically declining, it can be macular degeneration. I have a lot of clients with macular degeneration. There's a huge loss. Vision, hearing, their mobility, their physical mobility, and their ability to drive. They cannot get out. Those are the people that we really see are more isolated, and we do use these terms interchangeably because it's a cycle. We don't know if they're lonely to begin with and then they become isolated, or if they're isolated and they become lonely. I suspect it's a mixture of both.
And I'd like to just say something. You brought up something. I think it's the loss of independence. As you get older, and either by virtue of having a disease or just a situation where you've lost your partner, you find this loss of independence, and we just don't like that.
Yes, none of us like that.
Yeah, no local family or being estranged from the family. Retirement is huge.
Huge.
Just being connected with the community, whether it's the Filipino community, a resource center, being connected with senior centers, having some activity like boxing, being in the art community.
You see people do better when they're connected to something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about that a little bit because Tim is here with us and to share his own personal story of unexpectedly finding yourself feeling lonely and feeling depressed after what was like a vital career all through your midlife. So would you talk a little bit about how you got there and what happened?
My daughter passed away in 2012. I retired in 2017. That impact of her death through a motor vehicle accident, and it was totally, no one else was involved, no alcohol. It was taking a curve, and so there was nobody to blame. And so my ex-wife and I, we just kind of both didn't really know what to do. And so I know with me, I went to work, and I had a supportive staff. But when I would get home, that's when it was just like the shades would come down, it would get dark. I didn't feel like eating. I didn't feel like falling asleep. So I would just basically sit in a chair until I fell asleep with the TV on, and me not really watching it. As time went on, I have another daughter, so I thought, well, I've got something to live for. In some way, I still take care of, and so gradually that led me to have a discussion with her. My other daughter, Lucia, and she said, "Dad, you got to do something. You can't just sit here and go to work and then have nothing else on your plate." And I went, "Well, how do I do that? Where do I go?" At that particular point in time, I did see a physician. They prescribed medication, and I also saw a counselor. And I think in the end, over time, 9 months to a year, the counseling was much better because the side effects were positive. A lot of times the meds create other problems, and in fact, after about a year on the meds, I just wanted off of them because I almost felt better when I was depressed. But I worked with a physician, and eventually I started going out with friends again.
Can I ask you a question about
Sure.
that? So that was that the first time in your life you had ever sought counseling?
No, prior to that was when I divorced.
Okay, because I was going to say it's a brave act, I think, for someone late in their life to try
Yes.
something like
Yes.
that they've never tried before.
Well, prior to that, yes, I did. 2000. Let's see, we divorced in 1993.
So you knew it could hold some benefit for you.
I knew that it kept me from going over the edge,
Yeah.
and the edge could be many edges. Just isolation to ending one's life.
Yeah.
And so again, to have a human being who, with open arms, just allowed you to speak openly about things, cry. And again, that's where the courage came in. It was like, okay, I haven't done this. I'm an independent person. I've lived a strong, manly life. I'm a family man, husband, and then have that all washed away, and then have one of your children die.
It's a
It
lot
really,
of loss.
it really was the connection with the counselor, and then reconnection with friends, who I had been rejecting because I just wasn't fun anymore. And I think that's one of those things that hits all of us when we hit that isolation point. You feel alone, and there's nobody you can talk to because nobody understands. I also took advantage of hospice with the death of my daughter. And again, another resource here in Santa Cruz that I was just certainly glad that they were there. Again, we met with a group of other people who had lost children, and all of a sudden, you're not unique.
Yeah.
You share these losses, and you share some of the same feelings, and all of a sudden, you have empathy for each other, and
community.
and a community. And
So some people don't know that Hospice of Santa Cruz not only, provides medical support and care, but they have counseling also for people experiencing grief. That's the part that you were using.
right,
Yeah.
right.
So we'll make sure that is added to our resource list too, and posted with the show.
Yeah, the hospice
Yeah.
was excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Dedicated people.
Yeah. Liz, from your experience, when you listened to Tim describe his, what happened for him, is any of that familiar, or do you feel like you kind of see similar things happening with the clients that you work with?
Absolutely. Most of what he said, or all of what Tim had experienced, the loss, and it can be loss of a family member, it can be loss of friends that you're connected with. You can become a family caregiver for a spouse or a partner or a child, and become isolated because of that. Being a family caregiver is pretty much a 24/7 job, and it takes a toll on folks. Loss of vision, we talked about earlier, some of those physical conditions, the hearing loss, the loss of vision, certainly the mobility and the ability to drive. And there are resources in Santa Cruz County that can address those issues. And that's what we try to do at Senior Network Services, is link people to those resources.
Okay, and what have you seen people do to try to avoid those pitfalls?
Starting early, having the conversation early, I think, is huge with friends or family, or other, peers.
What do you mean by early?
Before retirement, as you're transitioning into retirement, we call the younger, older adults rather than the older adults. I think it's a timing timing thing before you're experiencing that. Get connected in some way and start talking about these things. That what am I going to do when I retire? Do I have some kind of interest? Oftentimes it only takes one thing. I like to be in the art community. I'm a painter, or I like to walk and I'm connected with the Sierra Club. There are, just a multitude of things that people can be interested in, and that is really all it takes.
I mean, because as my own family members have aged and I've watched them, one thing that I really saw that was a skill that was required to age well was this flexibility, because there might be something like Sierra Club hiking that they're really involved with, but now mobility has changed and they can't do that. And so what I saw in my family members and continue to see is that when there's some adaptability to take up a new interest or get involved in something new, that they do better.
And I think in my experience that people who have been involved earlier in their lives, and they're a person who is involved, they're more of an extrovert. They like to get out there. They like to be involved in things. They tend to have more flexibility and willingness to try new things. People who are naturally introverted and they completely identify with their career, that's how they identify. They get to retirement age, they retire, then they have nothing. That's where we start finding more challenges in getting them connected.
Like, from your experience, how have you helped people that might have that tendency to be not as extroverted, not as social?
It's tough. The woman who is actually the face of the museum exhibit, her name is Ruth. She is on the wall with her. She was involved with the photography project like Tim was. And I was just able to have conversations with her and express the importance of getting this issue out there. She had become very isolated. Well, she had become very lonely, not isolated. She lives in congregate living. She has family that visits her and on a weekly basis and has lots of interactions with other people, but still feels lonely. So just in doing a lot of listening and encouragement, being very empathetic and really trying to get her to believe in the issue itself. And we were able, I was able to do that with her.
KSQD thanks Family Service Agency of the Central Coast for supporting this program. Family Service Agency provides counseling and support for people of all ages facing life crises and challenges. You can reach them at 423-9444 to see if they can help you. Thank you, Family Service Agency of the Central Coast, for supporting KSQD 90.7 FM.
This is State of Mind, being human and living well. We're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. In case you're just joining us, I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and today I'm here talking with Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History exhibit participant Tim Znamierowski and with senior service professionals Mike McConnell and Elizabeth Hutton, and we're discussing the issue of social isolation and loneliness in older adults. Back to our interview.
Can I add something to what Liz just said?
Okay.
What she said about retirement, up-and-coming retirement. As I said, what I found, the living part of me was still my association with myself as a dentist with a practice taking care of people. But when I left the office, I had nothing. Well, I actually had a lot, but I didn't recognize any of it because I didn't want to recognize any of it. And I rejected people giving me a hand. So my big fear was what was going to happen to me after retirement. Everything I identified with would be gone. I didn't have a few friends and a daughter living nearby, but I was really, that was kind of putting things off. But as my Parkinson's progressed, I realized that it wouldn't be fair to patients, so I had to start considering retirement. And I like to say, if you had seen me 2.5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to talk about boxing. I wouldn't have been able to talk about a community that I belonged to. I wouldn't have been able to talk about caring because none of that existed in my mind. But I did make one important choice, and that was to go to a Rocksteady boxing course 1 week after I retired. I was given a big ball, And there were 18 people in a circle, and I was told to go in there and make friends. So I started bouncing the ball, and pretty soon I realized that 18 people and me were in the same thing. We were having fun, and it reminded me of kindergarten, when you're there and you don't know anybody, but you're sent into a circle, you're given a ball, and you're said to have fun. I realized these seniors had fun. They were playing again. They were learning something. I walked out of that first hour and a half about 1.5 feet off the ground, and I felt so good that I had to go back. That was a Friday. I had to go back Monday just to see if this was an aberration. It wasn't. And so I continued to start Rocksteady Boxing, and that allowed me to have this sense of community. And again, people who identified and understood what I was feeling, what stage I was in, I was able to see them, and it gave me an opportunity to give back. And again, it's one of those things, the more you give, the more you receive. And I see that in this group, and I think that probably exists in hospice and all the other places we talked about. But again, the seniors have to get out of the seat, and they have to take that risk. It is a risk. It's not going to happen like it necessarily did with me, like 1 minute you have no one, and the next minute you're in part of a community. So again, unfortunately I have Parkinson's, but Parkinson's allowed me to live a fuller life.
I want to highlight what Tim had mentioned there. He stepped outside of his comfort zone. He took the risk. He did not necessarily want to go and not very excited about it, but took that first step, took that risk, and put himself out there. That is key.
And I thought I would fail.
And did you fail?
No.
That's right.
No.
Did some part of you, when you said you didn't want to do it, did some part of you also believe this wasn't really going to make a difference?
Well, as I was driving over the hill to San Jose, because we didn't have one in Santa Cruz at that time, I went, what am I doing commuting to boxing over the hill? I mean, that's just didn't make sense to me. But but again, the neurologist who I trusted said, you got to give it a chance. You've got to give it a chance, because if you have Parkinson's, physical activity is not an option. It's mandatory. And I went, okay, I'll give it a try. And I found out, I just found out this great community of great people, all in the same boat, different stages, and we just have a ball together. 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Literally, we have a ball together.
With the ball.
With the ball, and with the gloves, and yeah. And it's non-contact boxing. We don't fight each other. We fight the disease. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just follow up on what Tim said? Because my father, when he got older, began losing his mobility. He had Parkinson's and several other conditions, but neuropathy in his feet. So he's unable to walk, but had been a very physically active person, loved to fix things around the house, really identified with strength and independence. So it was difficult for him to know how to reach out. But one way that we were able to get him sort of re-engaged in life was to ask him to write his own autobiography. And we got him into writing and writing poetry, which is something he did when he was younger. And he would share that with family, and we would give him feedback. So even though he lacked the mobility, he had to let go of his identity of independence and strength that used to be there, and then come to terms with another one and take that risk to actually, write something and put it out there for people to look at.
And again, it's an active choice. It's something that we can passively just sit there and let the sun go around the earth, or we can step out of our comfort zone. And that is, as you said, Liz, one of the most difficult things to do.
My experience being a therapist is that there are times that we need to wallow. We want to, and it doesn't matter what people tell us, this is exactly where we're going to stay.
Sure.
And then there comes some point where something happens inside of people and they're ready. So I'm curious, what was the turning point for you? What made you decide to get in your car and drive over the hill and try this thing that you didn't even think might help you?
Well, I think probably my experience in the 2 periods in my life where I had depression was, I know that place and I don't want to go there. I eat well. I walk all the time. So I thought, but the only thing I'm missing is a sense of community. And since I wasn't 20 years or 18 years old, making friends is not as easy at 70 as it is then, when you're younger. So I think the thing that made me step out of my comfort zone was the fact that I knew I just didn't want to go back to the depression. And the only way out was to meet people. And this was one opportunity. Fortunate for me, I loved it right from the get-go. And I found myself, again, an image of kindergarten. You know, we are all in this group. We're learning to walk again. We're learning to get out of cars. We're learning different ways of buttoning our shirts, getting up, rolling over in bed. These are all things that are diminished. But as we say at Rocksteady, that's no excuse.
What's different about your life now since you've gotten involved in this?
Well, the fear of retirement and having nothing but empty days ahead of me does not exist in my world now. I box 4 times a week. I do beach volleyball once a week, so 5 days a week. And this is true for everybody in Rocksteady, is we plan our lives around that time between 11 and 1 o'clock, 5 days a week. And everything else is secondary. Our shopping, our doctor's appointments, but we don't, because we have such a sense of community. And I guess the other thing is, after an hour and a half of really vigorous working out, your endorphins kick in. So that's a side effect of physical exercise that is very pleasurable and keeps me, one of the reasons for keep me coming back, but I think the big reason is that sense of community and the fact that we just have such a good time together.
So, you know, Tim was talking about what made him make the decision to make that change in his life. And Liz, I'm wondering, in your work, do you come across, you know, people who just really have trouble for some set of reasons making a choice like that? And what are some of the factors that might get in their way about, you know, receiving help or being, you know, open to that?
There's a spectrum of folks. Some never do reach out and are able to grasp onto help, and some are able to just take that first step. You know, oftentimes their one connection will be me coming to their home once a month and just talking. And through those discussions, I may talk them into visiting one of the Meals on Wheels daily meal sites that are throughout the county. That's often a place, and for folks that don't drive, Liftline will come and pick them up and bring them there. I may go with them the first time. You know, they're familiar with me. We have built this rapport, this relationship. They trust me. That's huge. Sometimes it takes months to build that trust with folks, and I can get them to come out. One of the things that I'd like to see happen for folks like that, that are not naturally prone to, you know, getting out there and meeting people, and like Tim had mentioned, that it gets harder as you get older, is having anybody that's in an activity, already participating in an activity like that, be an ambassador to those new people coming in. When you're new coming into a place, all it takes is somebody reaching out their hand and saying, "Hi, welcome, I'm so glad you're here, what's your name?" And connecting with them on a regular basis. Sometimes a family member can bring them to an event or to an activity.
How can family members be helpful when they see a loved one slipping into further and further loneliness and, you know, possibly depression?
Very carefully, because oftentimes, and I don't know if Tim ever felt this way, but they don't want to be a burden. I hear that over and over. I don't want to be a burden on my family. I'm always been the parent. I've been the one taking care of everything, and now I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to lose my independence. I don't want to be seen as not independent. And so for a family member or even a friend, again, listening is huge, and letting that person know that they're not a burden, and maybe not using that word necessarily, but just saying how grateful, I'm really grateful that, you know, you're to be with you today, and letting that person know that it's fun for them as well.
So your organization, as you've described it, plays a pretty big role in helping seniors in a variety of ways. And I'm wondering what exact, like specific programs does Senior Network Services have that help address like these specific kinds of issues that we're talking about isolation, loneliness?
I do a lot of resource counseling, and a family member will call up and say, you know, I've got my mom, I moved her out here from another state or another area, and I'd like to come in and sit down and talk about what's available in the community. And that's when I will talk about, depending on where they're at, I meet the client where they're at, you know, what their needs are. I can talk about the senior centers. There's a few that are very, very active. I can talk about the meal sites. I can talk about volunteer opportunities. Oftentimes I hear that, you know, I don't have a purpose anymore. I used to work, now I don't. What's my purpose? I don't feel like I am of value. They can become foster grandparents. They can become senior companions. Those are programs through the Seniors Council. They can volunteer with the Volunteer Center of Santa Cruz. They can, for those that are still driving, what a huge need in this county to be able to take folks to do essential errands. We have Liftline and Metro Paracruz that can take folks to medical appointments. Actually, Metro Paracruz has a fee associated. Liftline is income-based. And so volunteers are essential. They can become involved in the Helping Hands program through the Volunteer Center. If they used to be a handyman and they still want to, you know, put up grab bars or fix a cabinet. So there's lots of areas where they can volunteer, and then and so that's what I offer. I sit and I listen to where they're at, what their needs are, and then talk about what's available in the community. One of the things about Senior Network Services is we are a central phone number. You have one phone number you call. We can connect you with all the resources in the county. And
Both the ones that are within your program and then other programs too.
Right. So we have 7 different programs. We have our foundation is information and assistance. So when someone calls, I like to say you don't get on the phone tree merry-go-round. Somebody actually answers the phone. It may be as simple as, can I get my taxes done? Project Scout just ended. We just went through that. I'm turning 65. I have questions about Medicare. That's another one of our programs we call it HICAP. It's Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program. They know all things Medicare. And we have our resource counseling and case management component for folks that have a higher level of need and need that ongoing assistance. Let me see, we have a money management program. That is the only program that there is a fee associated with because we get no funding to do that. And they will help with budgeting and paying bills. We don't have control of people's finances, but we will help them with that.
When I first was meeting you on the phone, you told me about a shared housing program. Do you want to talk about that?
That is another one of our housing program, and part of that is our shared housing program. What that is a homeowner who has a room in a home and either a shared or private bath that wants to share their home with either another senior or somebody under 60. Only one person needs to be over 60 years old. Oftentimes the home provider will be the older adult who may need some service exchange. We are not a licensed care facility, so we don't provide personal care, but shopping, housekeeping, light yard work, transportation is huge. Companionship, having somebody in the home overnight so that person does not have to be there alone overnight. And there's 3 different levels. This is important to know. One can be rent only. Sometimes they just need a little extra subsidy to their income. And there's a rent only. Then there's the service exchange and rent combined, and then just service exchange. And that's all negotiable based on, I call it a home provider driven program because it's really based on the home provider's needs.
Yeah. So there's a lot of possibilities. If people want to get in touch, your agency would help steer them to what's most appropriate for their needs.
That's right. And 2 other programs that are huge that I cannot forget to mention is our Home Help Registry, and that is where we will have home care providers that do the same kind of service exchange that I just mentioned through our shared housing program. No personal care, but again, a lot of housekeeping. And there are people that can provide those services. They're not employed at Senior Network Services. Then a senior who needs that service will call in and we connect them up. And also there's our family, I'm probably not going to get this right, family caregiver support program. And that provides a case managed component, a lot of resource counseling, directing people towards caregiver support groups. And then also there's a respite grant that we can provide to family caregivers that is once in a lifetime money that then they can hire somebody to come in and that family caregiver can get some respite.
Yeah, we did. I'm not sure we had talked about that today, but I know when I originally, contacted you, we talked about that being one of the factors that often leads to isolation, is being in the role of being a caregiver and having your world and your connections really shrink because 24/7 you're providing care for a spouse or a loved one or.
That's right, and burnout is huge in that area because it's all encompassing, especially with the increased prevalence of dementia. And you cannot leave that person alone, and that often really takes its toll on folks, both mentally and physically, and they find themselves getting to a point to where they cannot care for their loved one. They become very isolated. They've let go of all of their outside connections, and we provide that grant. So does the Alzheimer's Association, and so does Del Mar Caregiver Support Groups.
Good to know, yeah. I do want to give a shout out too to Family Service Agency that provides senior outreach program, because that's also a really critical program. Do you want to talk about that at all?
One of my favorite referral places. I utilize that program a lot. Folks can volunteer for that program. There is always a shortage.
Do you want to explain what it is? People probably don't know.
So it's called Senior Outreach, and what they have are peer counselors that will come to a senior's home and talk about their depression or their anxiety, and just be there for them and have that conversation on a weekly basis. So it's a peer counseling program.
Yeah, and I know the volunteers that do it get so much out of it too, because I've been fortunate to be able to go in and do some trainings for them, and they're just lit up about doing this work and being able to provide service to other seniors that way. Many of them are seniors themselves.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And everyone that all of my clients that have a peer counselor, they become very connected to that person, and I always hear really good feedback, very positive feedback.
So I want to touch on that point about that role of feeling vital and, being able, when people are able to recontribute back, and it seems like that's become a big part of what you're doing, Tim. Do you want to talk about that?
One of the things I set my goal was to go to Indianapolis and become a coach. So I work with some of the stage 3 and stage 4 Parkinson's, which means we have less mobility. As you say, when I find myself doing this, I'm rewarded in ways that I never imagined one at my age would be rewarded for sharing. It's a positive energy. So the people who come there, and they find themselves in a sense of community.
You're tuned to listener-supported 90.7 FM KSQD, K-Squid, community radio for the Monterey Bay. And we're also live streaming over the web at ksqd.org. In case you're just tuning in, I'm your host, Deborah Sloss, and today I'm here talking with MA exhibit participant Tim Zanemorowski and with senior service professionals Mike McConnell and Elizabeth Hutton. And we're discussing the issue of social isolation and loneliness in older adults and the current exhibit called We're Still Here at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History on this very topic. Back to our interview. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the exhibit, Mike, because you were really key in bringing that about.
Yeah, so the creation process itself was a really meaningful process for those of us that were on the planning committee, and we met once a month for 6 months, and it was facilitated by MA staff. And I want to give a shout out to Stacy Garcia and Jeff Kaplan. Jeff Kaplan was the facilitator who was a teacher for young kids, and it's amazing that the methods that worked for hurting young children also worked for hurting a group of 100 to 200 people trying to
corralling, you mean, not
Yes.
hurting. I just want to be clear.
Herding.
like herding cats, but
Yes,
Right.
got it.
yeah. But the process itself was wonderful. So one of the first things we did was come up with our goals, and they called those the 5 big ideas. And generally, we wanted people to find a way to be empathetic with the experiences of those being isolated or lonely, but also to understand their value and to begin to work on coming up with a community solution to actually take action. And then, after the exhibit's over, we're going to get back together and talk about how things went and talk about, as a community now, how do we move through this?
So there even might be next steps that come out of this.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So Tim, the reason you came here, or that I even came to meet you, was because of your participation in the exhibit. And you want to talk a little bit about how you got involved and why?
Well, again, long-standing interest in art that I had buried for 20-some. Well, actually, dentistry is art too. There's chroma, hue, and value in teeth. So, so it was a way of getting into a bigger picture. And also, I guess, in my retirement, I became more like a child again, and didn't have a problem saying, "Hey, what's your name?" to somebody next to me. And I think as adults, again, we're not trained to continue that childlike ability to just see the person next to you and say, "Hey, what can we do together?" We just don't do that. We're taught to be independent, strong, and oftentimes I think asking for help is seen as a sign of weakness. It's not. It's a sign of strength. It's taking a risk. Like, yeah, I've never done that before. And I remember one of the most uncomfortable things at Ma was all these seniors put together, and then Stacy or somebody would say, "Okay, now turn to the person next to you and the person behind you. Introduce yourself. Tell something about something." Once you broke the ice, then we all started gabbing. But again, there was that moment of like, "Oh, this is uncomfortable. Why do I want to know that person? Why do I want to know that person?" Well, because we're here.
And we're all humans.
We're here, and we're still here, and we're not invisible, and we're doing something as a community. And again, a shout out to the staff, Stacy, Nina, all the other, Jeff.
These are people at the Museum of Art and History.
Right,
Yeah.
and they're the ones who created the template that the staff put us through and came up with this beautiful exhibit.
And really helped connect you as a community, it sounds like.
Right. Yeah, because I've made some friends there now that we see each other outside of needing anything other than, "Hey, you're not doing anything tonight? Let's do something."
So how are you continuing to be involved as the exhibit's up now? In what ways are you continuing to be involved?
There was a ambassador art option. I applied for that, and 4 of us now lead groups through the exhibit. So I find myself again in a position that's not necessarily comfortable for me, but once I get started, I enjoy it. And I think everybody who's come through that exhibit when I've been there has experienced empathy, something definitely from the heart. And there's been tears. There's also laughter. And it also shows some resilience of seniors. But again, I think the resilience is backed by the sense of community, the senior resources that Liz speaks of, that Mike has spoken of. I think that's important. And that's what keeps me coming back, is that sense of community, because that was lacking while I was working and prior to my retirement. I didn't plan for that.
Mm-hmm. So Mike, when I was speaking to you earlier, you mentioned that part of the design of the whole exhibit was about creating community. Can you say something about that, about how, this is not just about educating the public, but it's about actually being part of a solution?
Yeah, so I think one of the primary things we wanted in our planning group were seniors to participate, and I think we had over 70, you know, so the participation was great. What probably wasn't intentional planning was just the sense of community and purpose created by being on the planning committee for all of us, no matter what your age, was a solution to isolation and loneliness, because we're out there doing things we're normally uncomfortable with, but working with other people that are feeling the same way, going through a creative process and having a finished product that we can then bring people to see. For me, it's had a lasting impact, and some of the perspectives I got from other people has changed my view of my own work and my own purpose in life.
Do you want to give an example? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tim would be a good example for me, because in the work I do, we tend to work with really vulnerable older adults. And when you work in that area, you sort of begin to see your community from that perspective. And the truth is, there's people like Tim out there that have navigated isolation and loneliness and have become productive again and found their own things. And just listening to the wisdom of some of the people in the group that move through that. And when you go through the exhibit, there's telephones, different types of telephones throughout the exhibit, and you can pick them up, and a senior gives you some advice or tells you something. And I think I had lost that. So it's not just about helping seniors, but the value that seniors have for our community is something we need to take back and bring back into the community. And ironically, involving seniors on helping on senior issues is actually, I think, a solution and a way to keep people involved, and a model that I'm looking forward to replicating, you know, throughout the community. And once the exhibit's over, you know, having people like Tim and others get together after the exhibit's over, and what's the next issue? What do we work on now? Yeah.
I am aware that it has something called the action wall on the exhibit. Can you describe what that's about?
Right, so when people go through the exhibit, you kind of come in and go around through the exhibit. When you get to the end of the exhibit, there's an action wall, which are business card size little cards that are actions that you can take to be part of the solution. So giving people in the community who have now experienced this exhibit and want to do something the opportunity to do that. And that's connecting to a lot of the resource and volunteer groups that Liz was talking about.
And the actions are both big and small, right?
Big and small.
Do you want to give a range, like an idea of how big, how small?
Yeah, so I mean, some of them are as simple as, you know, visiting your neighbor, and some of them are as big as becoming a licensed caregiver for somebody that needs in-home support, somebody that's isolated. Yeah, and a range of things in between, but volunteering, I think, is probably one of the greatest ones. Yeah.
So if folks want to get out and see the show, do you want to say some specifics about what they should know about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you come, you know, maybe come by yourself first to get a sense of it, and then think about who else you want to bring back. And if you're part of a group, like a faith-based group, or you're a teacher at a school and you want to bring your kids through, I would give the Ma a call. So, you know, a senior ambassador like Tim can be there to meet the group and take them through the exhibit. I think if you can have that experience with a senior ambassador, it's much more meaningful, and Tim can answer questions at the end.
Okay, so if folks want to arrange for a group, that they could contact someone at the MA, and the website there is santacruzmah.org.
Yes, and their telephone number is 831-429-1964.
Great. Okay, and the exhibit runs through...
It initially was going to run through September, but they've had such overwhelming interest, they're going to run it through January 12th now. And they thought it was important to take it through the holidays, where isolation and loneliness tends to have a larger impact.
Oh, wonderful. So people listening to the show are going to have plenty of time to get out and get a chance to see it, and even make arrangements to bring a group back.
Exactly.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Thank you. You know, I went to the exhibit too, and I know I had my favorite parts, and I'm wondering if each of you that were involved in creating it wanted to say anything about, your personal favorite part of the exhibit.
I think for me, having gone through the planning, even though I was very familiar with what I was going to see, I was still very impacted by what I saw. And I think what I enjoyed the most were the telephones and just listening to the voice of somebody talking to me about an experience in their life or something that had meaning for me was impactful.
Mm-hmm. So all through the exhibit, people can pick up these telephones and they actually hear people telling their own stories.
Right. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's any piece of it that I didn't find important and impactful. Yeah.
What about you, Tim?
Well, I think the one that caught my eye is the game when you just enter and you turn left. There's the game of life, and there's one part that you're given 3 coins, but you have 5 things that you can either spend on medicine, food, transportation, fun, or I forget what the other one is.
Housing, rent.
Housing or rent, and
They're
that's
all
not
core things that people...
core things. You don't have to just be a senior. Everybody experiences that, I think, throughout their life. There'll be times when it's, I've got 5 bills and I only have 3 payments. What do I do? So again, this is a dose of reality that's shared, and it's a common experience. So I think that, again, going through the exhibit, you're going to find different things that you relate to that are part of your, whether you know a senior, are a senior, or have plans to become a senior, go to the exhibit.
Yeah.
You'll find something there for yourself.
I would say go several times to the
Yes.
exhibit, because I think that if you went 5 different times, you're going to experience it in 5 different ways. One of my favorite was definitely picking 3 out of 5. What do you leave out? What do you not do? That was huge for me. I'm a little biased towards the photo stories. I loved those. I thought they really gave a good picture of what some of the seniors experience. For me, it was kind of the process and the journey of it. That's what I liked the most. I really loved hearing the stories from the older adult population. I loved to watch the interactions that they had with each other and with the artists and with the museum staff. And also keeping the conversation going. Yeah.
Yeah. I really like the artwork too.
Yes.
That first you learned about these individuals, you learned something about their story, and then you saw their much more subjective kind of images about that. And some of those were very powerful. I loved the piece you had in it too, Tim.
And also, I want to mention the interactive quilt making
Yes.
part. People got to make squares of a quilt, and then there's going to be a quilt produced from that. They got to actually participate.
Oh, wonderful.
Huge.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's a huge point for involving people.
Yes,
And
coming
giving them
in.
a way to put their personal stamp.
Right.
Uh-huh.
To be part of it,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
of that ongoing exhibit.
Yeah. So yeah, I do encourage people to get out and see it. It's very moving and meaningful. And I want to give each of you too a chance, if there are specific, we've talked about a lot of different things, and if there are specific resources that we haven't yet talked about, this would be a good time. And I want to remind our listeners that we will have a resource list with much of what we've talked about posted along with the podcast of this show on the ksqd.org website.
So I'd like to encourage anybody who does have access to a computer to get on the seniornetworkservices.org website. We have the resource directory is listed there, but we also have it in print. We produce it every year. It's called the Senior Resource Directory. A lot of folks are familiar. I did bring copies for you folks. It is the yellow book, as we call it.
A hefty yellow book.
And it's developed over time. We update it every year. Every resource that I have mentioned is listed in there. Transportation, it's by category, and then also by specifics in the index.
Wonderful. Yeah, what a resource for our
And
community.
utilizing our phone number is 831-462-1433. If you have any questions, someone will answer the phone and direct you in the right way.
Fabulous. How about you, Mike? Is there anything you want to share that we haven't yet had a chance to?
Yeah, I would just like to say in almost 22 years of doing social services, it became clear to me fairly early on in my career that social and community issues are really never going to be solved by the government. And over the years, we've really tried to figure out how to engage the community in making them aware of the issues, which are difficult in county social services because there's laws of confidentiality that we're kind of operating a secret society. So how do you make people aware of the issue? And I have to say that this exhibit and this social impact model is the best model that I've ever seen and the most effective that I've ever seen. And I'm not alone in that. We brought in some of our Bay Area colleagues to take a look at the exhibit, to visit some of the planning sessions. And there's at least 4 other Bay Area counties that are going to replicate the exhibit in their communities because they see the impact and the potential for getting the community involved in solving community issues.
It's really great. And excited to see what happens next with that, too. What about you, Tim?
Well, I think I mentioned Rocksteady. Hospice, again, is one of the ones that I really want to give a shout out to because I think the older we get, the more likely we are to experience the need for grief resolution, and sharing that with people.
Okay, great. And I know that you gave me some other ones, too, about places to get specific exercise for people that have Parkinson's. We'll have that listed as well.
Yes. Like Dominican Hospital has PEP classes, and that's not just for Parkinson's. They have various things for caregivers and everything. And again, excellent staff. We're lucky here in Santa Cruz that we have all these resources. So I urge everybody to take the risk. Pick up the phone, call somebody, and see where that takes you.
It's good advice. Well, I just want to say thank you again to all 3 of you for being here with me today.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah.
And thank you for joining us here on State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm your host, Deborah Sloss. For more conversations about mental health and wellness here on the Central Coast, join me on the first Sunday of every month from 6 to 7 p.m. right here at K-Squid, 90.7 FM. All State of Mind shows seek to educate by featuring personal stories of mental health recovery and wellness and the sharing of resources. So if you have a topic idea, or maybe you have a story to share, email me at debra.stateofmind@ksqd.org. Special thanks to my co-producer Lauren Fine for lending her technical expertise and her general wizardry to help bring this show to you. Also thanks to acoustic guitarist Adrian Legg for composing, performing, and donating the use of our theme music. If you like what you're hearing, help us keep it going and go to the donate button on our website, ksqd.org. Donations of any size really do help. You can become a supporting member, or if you have a business, consider underwriting this or another program. Just go to the Support Navigation tab at ksqd.org. You can also find more podcast episodes of this show by typing State of Mind in the search bar. This is listener-supported community radio for the Monterey Bay, KSQD Santa Cruz. Just remember, 90.7 FM, K-Squid, your ink spot on the dial. Stay with us.